Hi, I'm Doug Brignoli.
And I'm Mo Larbi from Smart Training 365. Welcome to the Brig 20 videos.
We're glad you've joined us. We're going to talk about the Brig 20, and that refers to the 20 best anatomical motions for physique development and muscular development. Now, some of these have alternatives, and we're going to show you all of these exercises one by one. So come and join us. Let's get started.
He's also selling rather expensive courses on his website, $240, $450, $697, which seems expensive. I haven't looked at the contents, so I don't know their quality or not. But even if they are very high quality, I would say $700 for any kind of content is quite a bit. I mean, it's not like Greg Doucette coaching high, but that's still pretty high.
All right, I can answer that question. So we have different programs. Each program has a price. Like some programs is like 240, as he said, 297. You know, that's one program. There is a combination of programs. That's why the prices are different. So if a program has like two programs in it, because some people want a specific thing combined with another one, they can find that option. That's why it's a little bit expensive. The 700 is a combination of different programs together at one, you know, in one program. So that's why the prices are different.
Well, the other thing that has to be taken into consideration is what's the value of it? What are you gaining from it? Okay, so let's look at it two ways. One way of looking at it is, let's just say you pay $700, which is basically $2 a day over the course of a year. Now, what do you gain from that? Well, you gain a significantly improved perspective on how to optimize your benefits and minimize your risk and save time with all of your blood, sweat, and tears in the gym.
Right.
If you only pay $2 a day for 1 year and for the rest of your life, it's free. Think about how many years you will save yourself time, wasted effort, injury, and get significantly better results. So, you know, it's the whole thing of amortizing it out. But the other way of looking at it is this, is we can actually show you probably hundreds at this point.
Absolutely.
Of people who have sent us emails saying, I wish I had learned this stuff 30 years ago. In fact, I will go so far as to give you a quote. Mo knows this because we interviewed him. This is on tape. This is my publisher. His name is Jim Peterson, PhD, published my book. He said, we asked him the question, simple question, what did you think when you read Doug's manuscript? And he said, you know, I published over 100 fitness books. Nearly as many authors. He says, I have a PhD in physical education. I taught West Point Academy for 20 years, strength training. I taught all the great generals, including Petraeus. And when I read Doug's manuscript, I was impressed and I was ashamed. And we said, ashamed? He said, I taught those generals wrong because I didn't know what was in Doug's book. He said, it's obvious that the book is well-researched. It's obvious that what he's saying there is accurate and true. And yet it's not my fault. It wasn't available, but I'm still ashamed because I wish it had been available. I wish I had known about it. Wayne Westcott, who wrote the foreword to my book, professor of exercise science, author of over 30 fitness books, said that in his courses in exercise physiology, biomechanics as is applied to resistance exercise was completely void. It's just not there. So $700, you think that's a lot of money? People go to universities and spend far more than $700 and don't get this information that is now obviously approved by some of the highest, brightest minds in the country. So it just depends on in fact, let me see if I can find something here.
And besides that, there are also different courses that are sold in different personal trainers association that are like above $1,000. That doesn't include the biomechanics that we talk about. There are other courses that are $3,000 and $4,000. You know, so well, 700 and a combination of programs is nothing.
And I would say that, look, if you have any doubts, just buy the book. The book is $70.
Right.
And it will open your eyes. It will make you think. I mean, just look at the reviews on Amazon. Just look
Yeah.
at the reviews on Amazon. People will say, holy crap, for the first time in my life, it makes sense. Once you see the reaction of people, and once you see what's in this book, you will want more. You will want videos, you will want examples, you will want protocols. I'm not saying spend $700 right out of the gate.
Yeah.
I'm just saying open your mind, listen to common sense, listen to reason. That's what we're doing. I'm even using models to demonstrate and show and quantify.
Yeah.
Right. So this is not theoretical. This is all provable stuff.
I know many of our students and the people who enrolled in our courses are watching. Would like them to also share their experience in the comment section, because it's good to hear it from them. You know, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to really feel that I'm trying to advertise it, because
Right.
the content doesn't really need advertising. But in today's world, you have to advertise so people know about it.
You have to know about
Otherwise,
it.
how are you
Yeah.
going to reach
Yeah.
like different countries?
Yeah. And like he said, we do not make crazy claims like this program will make you Superman. Right. We just talk about what is better than what and why. Right. We just talk about mechanics. I want to show you this one slide. This is I think his name is DeMaio. He's unfortunately passed away, but look at his quadriceps. They're massive. He's doing sissy squats. Right. And you can see, as we've talked about before, the lower leg getting horizontal, getting into that perpendicular position with resistance. Obviously, this contributed to his leg development, his quadricep development. Now, granted, he didn't do only this exercise. And so you might say, well, yeah, but, you know, he just used that as a finisher. You know, he really got his mass from heavy squatting. And I would say, well, you know, you can think whatever you want to think, right? But from an engineering standpoint, if you talk to an engineer and you evaluate the amount of load the quadricep gets, either in a barbell squat or in a sissy squat, you can clearly see that you will get much more load with much less weight used with a sissy squat than you can with a barbell squat. Never mind this, you know, reciprocal innervation that compromises the rectus femoris. But the other thing I want to show you too is here's some pictures of me. This was taken back in 2010. You can see my quads there, right? And this is not competition shape. This is sort of off season. From the side. Okay, this is no barbell squats. I stopped doing barbell squats at least 20 years ago. Probably in the year 2000, I stopped doing barbell squats because I realized that I could get more with other exercises without the discomfort and the strain and the risk. Here's a picture of me at the 2014 NABO World Championship. Now I'm standing next to two competitors, and arguably my legs are better than the other two competitors' legs. You might have your own separate opinion, but what I can guarantee you is that those other two competitors did do barbell squats. I did not. Here's another picture of four of us. Now you tell me which of those four people have the better quads. The other three didn't do any squats. The other three only did squats, or primarily squats and heavy leg presses.
Right.
I didn't do any squats, none. Now look at this picture here. Now tell me that isn't a massive leg. That's me shaking someone's hand on the stage of the NABA. This person on the video was saying that you can get juicy quads doing barbell squats. Now tell me that isn't a juicy big leg quad right there. Only, keep in mind, only sissy squats, cable squats, and leg extensions built those quads. That's saying something.
Yeah.
In other words, if anyone tries to tell you cannot build big legs without barbell squats, is wrong. He just doesn't understand the math. He doesn't understand the physics. And as I said, you saw those other pictures. It doesn't mean that if you do squats, you will have better legs than the person who trains smarter and doesn't do barbell squats.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing is the quadricep only extends the knee. That's all it does. It doesn't care what the hip is doing. Just because you're simultaneously extending the hip as you're extending the knee does not mean that the quadricep is benefiting from that. The quadricep plays no role in hip extension. In fact, the rectus femoris plays the opposite role. It flexes.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're going to reverse load, you're going to push down the top end of your femur, forcing your knee to bend, thereby loading your quadricep instead of pushing your ankle and loading your, either way, you're forcing your knee to bend and the quadricep is working against that force. So the quadricep literally has no idea what's causing that knee to bend and why it has to work opposite that force in order to extend the knee and low. So you have to think logically. This is not about using more weight. It's about causing the most amount of muscle load with the least amount of cost.
Here is a question that something that he said is worth asking you, because you talked about muscle load. So does muscle growth happen with tension or load? What is the difference?
Well, load is what you put on the muscle, and the muscle produces tension in opposition of load.
Uh-huh.
In other words, you know, if I put a weight, if I do a leg extension, that lever arm of the machine is loading my quadricep by pushing back against my lower leg. In order for me to fight that load, I have to produce muscle tension in my quadricep. So it's kind of one and the same. When you say how much tension, you're really saying how much load. Now, you know, load can be defined two ways. And I'm very careful when I write and when I speak about this. You might think the load is the weight on a bar.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the two forms of load. The other load is what that translates to the muscle. If I load my quadricep with 1,200 pounds of resistance of load, causing that muscle to produce enough tension to make that leg go straight, right? That is different than the 200-pound body weight load that I'm using to do it. What I'm doing basically is I'm using levers, the length of my limbs, to magnify my body weight. As I say in the book, the muscle never pulls directly on the weight.
Right.
Muscles pull on limbs that are holding the weight. So that means that everything having to do with that limb as a lever is related to physics. And to not understand that, to deny that, is naive.
Another question that he asked, because you talked about muscle pull on the lever. So the muscle, he said, is not a single cord. It's made of contractile units. So when you said like the muscle is pulling from origin to insertion, he's saying it's like a cord. It's not like a cord. It's like contractile. So what do you think of that?
And that's what he said in his second video.
Yeah, in the second video.
Guess what he said in his first video?
What did he say?
Muscles are like ropes.
You're using momentum or you're cheating, something like that, more weight could actually be less stress on the muscle. I think it's a good idea to just view a muscle as a machine. It's just a piece of rope that can contract. It's just a piece of rope that can contract. It's just a piece of rope that can contract. Okay, so it's entirely possible to use more weight and to actually get less activation of that muscle. Next, and this is important, a muscle is not a piece of string. It's just a piece of rope that can contract. A muscle is not a piece of string. It's just a piece of rope that can contract.
Muscle fibers are like ropes.
A lot of these models, they just assume that a muscle doesn't actually do anything. It's just transferring force. And yeah, if I pull on this side, I pull on this side, the tension is going to be equal throughout every part of, well, this isn't a string, it's an earbud, but it's going to be equal throughout the entire cord.
He said muscles are like ropes in his first video. So now that I took that same thing and I said, well, that's true. If muscles are like ropes, then blah, 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 right? Now he's trying to change. Look, it doesn't matter if it's contractile fibers. It doesn't matter if it's an elastic type of thing. It is a cord that has an origin and an insertion. And the function of a muscle is skeletal motion. It is to bend or move a joint. That is the function. How does that happen? It happens by that cord crossing the joint, shortening, contracting, pulling the origin and the insertion closer together, causing the joint that's in between to either extend or flex, open or close or rotate, right? This is how anatomical function works. That's why you can't work one end of a muscle and not the other end of a muscle, is because it would defy the purpose of having that joint move. If, you know, I always compare it to a tug of war. If two people are fighting with a rope, right? And the guy on the left starts to win and the rope starts to move in this direction, that tension is going to be evenly distributed throughout. And if this guy on the right starts to win, it's still going to be, and if you wrap that rope around a tree and one guy is pulling one way and the other way, it's still going to be relatively easy other than the drag that might happen from the tree, right? So, you know, some people try to argue that the lat wraps around the rib cage. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean that part of the lat is going to work more than the other part of the lat, because it still has to produce anatomical motion. So if one part starts to produce less tension, the other part has to produce less tension.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is aside from the drag, but you know, this argument about having the lat wrap around the rib cage. Imagine that you're going to take a rope and you're going to wrap it around a barrel. But keep in mind, how much are you wrapping it around? Are you wrapping around 90 degrees or wrapping around just like a 30-degree angle? You know, you're not going to get very much drag with a 30, 40-degree angle, right? And the drag does not enhance. That's the important thing, is the idea that someone would say, well, the rib cage acts like a fulcrum. Well, a fulcrum by definition is a pivot, right? And a pivot is a solid thing, right? So a pivot on a, you know, on a pendulum, right, is a fixed thing, right? So you're not necessarily creating a second pivot. I mean, you are creating some degree of drag, but you can bet that the way the anatomy is created, it's not going to snag, right? That muscle is not going to suddenly snag. So there's going to be a smooth wrapping around, whether you're going straight up to the side or whether you're going slightly in front. There's going to be a sliding effect that's not going to significantly change how those muscle fibers contract.
But I would never ever recommend doing only isolation exercises or primarily isolation exercises in order to get big, in order to build muscle, or in order to be functional or athletic or anything like that. To his credit, he doesn't claim like these are going to make you more athletic. He doesn't claim athletes should train like this. This is basically how to train for hypertrophy if you are older and more beaten up. And I think if you're younger, just thinking about these things is useful and important. I think this comment sums things up well. From NPC number blah, blah, blah. Mr. Brugonle makes some excellent points if you're older, risk-averse, and bodybuilding oriented. If you're into real-life useful strength and athletic function, look elsewhere. And to his credit, that's exactly what he was saying.
Is that what you're saying? Like that this is the only...
No, of course not. Of course not. It's sort of surprising what he thinks I've said, what he speculates I'm thinking, what he speculates. And again, like I said, you know, he didn't have a conversation with me beforehand. He didn't ask me questions about this or that. He might have heard me say one thing or another, took it out of context, and then thinks he understands the whole thing. And he hasn't read the book. Obviously, he hasn't read the book.
He's saying that he read it from cover to cover, and he's by the way doing these kind of videos about many other people. That's what he makes videos about.
Well, you know what he's trying to do. He's trying to create a reputation of being an expert. He's trying to create a and by the way, you don't have to be an expert to make that effort. You can pretend to be an expert, right? And a lot of people do. A lot of people pretend to be an expert, or maybe they don't pretend in their mind. Maybe in their mind they think they actually are, but they are to some degree deluded. Now, the first thing I want to comment about was that thing about compound versus isolation,
right?
That you're not going to build muscle size with an isolation. I've said this many times. We've said this many times, which is that a muscle only knows how much load it gets. It does not know what other muscles are working at the same time. It does not care what other muscles are working at the same time. A quadricep extends the knee. Its job is only that. It doesn't know whether your rectus spinae are also working. It doesn't know, you know, if it's working in isolation or as part of a unison effort. And the amount of load that a muscle gets determines whether it grows or not. 1,200 pounds of load on a quadricep will cause a quadricep to grow more than 950 pounds of load on a quadricep. And as I pointed out before, 950 pounds of load on a quadricep is what you would get if you were a 200-pound guy squatting with a 200-pound barbell. 1,200 pounds of quadricep load is what you would get if you were a 200-pound guy with no additional weight doing a sissy squat. The quadricep only knows about how much load it gets. You're going to get more size with 1,200 pounds, even though you're using less weight, because physics plays a significant role. Now, if you strengthen all the muscles individually through isolation exercises, those muscles are not stupid. They will be able to work together if and when you need them to work together. So if you were to go play basketball, if you were to go play baseball, football, whatever you want to go play, all of those muscles are stronger. All of those muscles comprise a strong body. Now, there is such a thing as sports training. There is such a thing as taking these isolation exercises, which are the best ones for strengthening individual muscles, far better than compound exercises, and then incorporating some very specific compound exercises that simulate some of the things you would do in that particular sport, partly for the proprioceptive benefit that they give you, right? Which is kind of a learned skill, right? So if you do something like, let's say you're a baseball batter and you take, a torso rotation machine and you simulate that movement, you're going to be able to improve your batting better. So but that does not eliminate the value of doing the isolation exercise. If someone says to me, I'm a pitcher, what do you recommend? The first thing I would say is start working your subscapularis, which is your internal rotator, right? As an isolated exercise, work the internal rotator, right? Then you can work on the other parts of the pitch, which is, throwing forward, the lunging, the turning of the waist, all those other things, which would have to be individually looked at. But again, it does not discount the value of optimally loading one particular muscle at a time, and getting the most benefit to that muscle so that it contributes to the greater total. So the other thing that he mentioned too is he mentioned that guy, that NPC guy that sums up. And he says, it's good for the guy who's risk averse. It's good for the guy that is beaten up, maybe older, and maybe just, bodybuilding oriented, but maybe not sport oriented. Okay, so let me show you a couple of the endorsements that I have, and you decide whether these endorsements count a little more, weigh a little more heavily than this NPC person's. Here's one by Lee Labrada. What does Lee Labrada say? Doug Brignoli brings together cutting-edge exercise science and decades of experience as a world-class athlete in the physics of resistance exercise. As a former engineer and professional bodybuilder, I appreciate the solid foundation of exercise science combined with the real-world applications. The concepts presented are solid, and once mastered, will take your training to a new level. This book is a must-read if you're serious about understanding the whys and hows of all the sets, reps, and training that you do as an athlete. I think I'll take Lee Labrada's endorsement over that NPC guy's commentary. How about one from Fred Hatfield, Dr. Squat? Now, this has some weight. Right here's a guy who built his career on barbell squats, world record holder in barbell squat, also the founder of International Sports Sciences Association. He said, through the many years in which I've been involved in weightlifting, powerlifting, and physical fitness, I've never read a more intelligent analysis of biomechanics, of the biomechanics of resistance exercise for the purpose of physique muscular development than the physics of resistance exercise. Doug Brignoli has done a remarkable job of explaining the elements that factor into this type of training. This book will likely revolutionize the way resistance exercise is taught from this point forward. Okay, how about another one? Wayne Westcott, one of the most prolific exercise science professors in the country, author of 30 books, said the physics of resistance exercise is absolutely superb. Doug's unique combination of biomechanics, physics knowledge, and practical competitive bodybuilding experience provides a perfect background and basis for his excellent advice on exercise selection and performance. Because I'm an old timer, which is important. I mean, this is the admission of someone who says, I believed in old school. Because I am an old timer who has studied this area extensively, although much more of my research in the area of physiology than biomechanics, I was actually aware of many of the principles and concepts that he presented. However, I did not have the confidence to change my workout exercises until I read Doug's compelling advice. He is indeed a qualified expert in academic knowledge, muscle development, and athletic achievement. Furthermore, I have never read any author who is more proficient in illustrating complex concepts with clear, practical, sensible examples than the average reader can understand and apply. Okay, here's another one. Here's one from Professor Jacob Rosen. He's a professor of biomedical engineering at UCLA. The physics principles that Doug Brignoli discusses in the physics of resistance exercise are universal principles. They apply to all things that are mechanical or structural. The human body is both mechanical and structural. The concept of applying these formula to resistance exercise in order to determine which exercises provide more or less load on specific muscles as compared to the actual amount of weight being lifted is extremely sensible and practical. Doug has done a good job of simplifying what is otherwise a very complex mechanical analysis involving considerable math for the purpose of acquiring a basic understanding of how to maximize exercise efficiency and minimize injury risk. I believe this book is an important contribution to the fitness industry. And then we've got one from, I'm not going to read it, but we've got from, you can see it there on the screen, from Bob Eckhart, who's a professor of evolutionary paleontology, who explains why it is that we should refer to the design of the human skeleton to know what is a sensible anatomical motion and what isn't. And here's one from Bill Pearl. What could be better than an endorsement from Bill Pearl? The final paragraph of Bill's prologue in my book is, Dougie's contribution might be the rational and scientifically sound insight he has brought to the field of resistance exercise for physique development through his teachings of biomechanics. His insights are profound and will likely change the way resistance exercise is taught, the way machines are designed, the way gyms are equipped, and the way trainers are educated. More importantly, Dougie's teachings will allow consumers to achieve their fitness goals with the utmost level of efficiency and safety. Now, you tell me, do you want to believe Bearded Guy? Do you want to believe NPC Guy over Bill Pearl, over Dr. Squat, over Lee Labrada, over Professor of Paleontology, over Professor of Biomechanical Engineering? This person is not aware of what he's talking about. He just doesn't. And that brings me to the final point that I want to make. And that is that this person, Bearded Guy, is not alone. And this is the reason why we made this video, is because it is somewhat common for people to fall into this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that's this next slide here, which is, now this is the same thing on both sides. It's looked at in different terms. On the left and the right is the same thing. On the one on the left, you can see competence scale is measured up. Confidence scale is measured up. Knowledge is measured along the bottom. And you can see that there's a spike, right? And that spike, when you first start to learn a little something, some people say a little knowledge is dangerous. That's where Bearded Guy is right now. I know everything. Then after you start to learn about physics and about neurology and about these other things we talk about, then all of a sudden your confidence level starts to come down and you get to the point where you say, there's more to this than I thought. And then you get to almost the base and you think, I'm never going to really understand this. And then you start to learn a little bit more and it starts to make sense. And then you get to a point where you say, okay, I know more, but trust me, it's complicated. And you'll notice on the right where it says expert and then the initial ignorant, which is the ratio, the difference between how confident you are when you really have knowledge versus when you don't. Once you have a certain amount of knowledge, the scientific method is always ready to learn something new, always ready to consider the possibility that what you know might refute what you thought you knew before based on this particular scientific information, right? So this is where Bearded Guy is right now. He's at that ignorant stage where he's ultra confident because he doesn't know what there is to know. Or maybe it started off that way. And maybe now he's starting to realize that there's more to it than he thought. And now he's stuck, as a lot of people get stuck, because now it's almost like you don't want to admit that you were wrong, that you thought you knew more than you did, that you made a mistake, that you shot arrows or shot criticism at someone who actually knew more than you. You don't really want to admit that. And so now you're trying to save face and trying to double down on what you said before. So it at least appears that you're consistent, right? When in fact, we all have to take a step back now and then. I certainly have taken steps back throughout my years where I had said some things and then I said, no, that was a mistake. I didn't know what I needed to know yet. Later, I learned more and later I revised my perspective. So this is the Dunning-Kruger thing. A lot of people fall into this situation where they learn a little bit of information. They think they know it all. They start preaching with a certain level of confidence. They gain a certain fan base. The fans think you're cool. The fans boost your confidence level without you actually knowing more, basically endorsing what you thought you knew. Listen, God bless him. Rick Drayson was wrong about a lot of things. but he was so confident about a lot of things that he didn't know, right? And a lot of people would praise him about his nutrition knowledge. No one knows nutrition like Rick Grayson, right? Well, Rick Grayson didn't have some good nutrition practices. And he said the doctors were crazy. And of course, he died of kidney failure because he was not listening to doctors, right? He was not listening to science. So this is what happens, unfortunately, and of course, Rick Grayson was a very good friend of mine, and he was a good person. This has nothing to do with whether you're a good person or not, right? We have to be open to the possibility that what we think we know isn't quite right. And we have to keep learning and keep researching and keep double checking, right? And I still do that, right? If this person had come to me and said, well, you've got your math wrong because your physics is actually blah, 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 blah. And if he actually demonstrated knowing more physics than I did, I would say, wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for that, right? But he didn't. He attacked me in the absence of explaining scientifically why. He would say squats aren't that bad. And I would say, that's not what we try to say, right? Do we want to do exercises that are not that bad? Is that our goal in life? Is that the optimal way to train, is to use exercises that are not that bad? We are shooting for a higher goal. We are shooting for optimal training. What gives you the most benefit with the least investment of energy, the least risk of injury, right? This is what we're shooting for. And this is the audience that we're talking to. We're talking to people who want better, not someone who wants good enough.
That's right. No, that's a clear message. And that's exactly why we decided to do the video, because even though the way he criticized you, some of it is sarcastic and to make views and stuff, but there is a positive thing, which is create these videos for those who really want to learn.
As I said, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. There are a lot of people out there that are confident about the wrong thing, and they're good people. Look, even Jim Peterson, who admitted that he was ashamed because he didn't know what he had learned from my book when he was teaching strength training at West Point Academy.
Right.
That is a humble, modest, science-oriented, mature person who says, I didn't know what I didn't know. I wish I had known. Yeah. As opposed to the person who is too arrogant, too confident, too narrow-minded to consider the possibility that maybe he doesn't understand it all. Why not call Doug up? Why not ask him about this? Why assume that this thing I heard is the only thing he recommends? Or why assume that he said this thing, so therefore he's thinking this? Or why say something as foolish as, that deadlifting 300, 400 pounds is basic survival shit? It's really, when do you need that? When in real world, when do you not survive because you didn't lift 300 pounds? This is narrow-minded.
Yeah, as you said, he seems like he's a good person, but he did what he did because he needed the views, he needed the attention, and it kind of create oh wow, what is there are people who are already waiting. Oh, what is your response? I said I'm not gonna respond to the second video because we already explained it in the first video, and he only elaborated on those things. So watch all the videos. I think this will be part 4 or 5 because I'm gonna cut it into different episodes. But you will see, you will understand why we did these many videos and how we broke down all the lifts and the things that he criticized.
We live in a social media world now, and social media to some degree invites personal attacks. It sort of invites, because that brings an audience. It's unfortunate that we live in this world that likes to see the rumble. Mm-hmm. They like to see the tit for tat, right? And we find ourselves in an interesting position because we say, well, look, let's not get emotional about this. I mean, there's a lot of people who are wrong about the same things, right? So whether it comes with a personal attack or not, the issue is, are these the misconceptions that are out there? And would it behoove everyone involved if we try to address these misconceptions, right? We believe there's benefit in that. We believe there's benefit in, we are also, I guess you could say, adjusting our strategy in a way, in the sense that, we are going to, from this point forward, not focus so much on individual recommendations that we disagree with, because I think that even though our heart was in the right place, which was to inform, it's bound to create some degree of embarrassment or some degree of, let's just call antagonism. And we don't want to create that. We want to just make sure that people understand what qualifies as a good exercise and why, and give you the information of how you measure these things, and then let you decide, do you want to waste your time with an exercise that maybe rates 4 on a scale of 1 to 10 rather than 9 or 10? If you want to do that, that's perfectly okay. We don't say don't do it, but our job is to tell you how to measure that, how to qualify that, and then let you decide.
Perfect. And for those who want to get your book, they can go to dougbrignoli.com and get the Physics of Fitness. And if you would like our online courses, whether you want to be certified or a training program, go to smarttraining365.com. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video. It took us some time to make all these slides and everything, but I hope you find value in what we did. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Subscribe to our channel. Let us know what you want us to cover in the next episode. Thank you very much, Doug.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.